On a quiet morning in the spring of 1978, a baby girl was born in a small hospital where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. The delivery room was calm, filled with the familiar sounds of soft instructions and steady breathing. Nurses moved with routine confidence. The doctor expected an ordinary birth, healthy baby, brief congratulations, another name added to the hospital records. But the moment the baby was lifted into the light, the room went silent. No one spoke, no one moved. The newborn wasn't crying yet. Her tiny eyes were still closed. But something about her made every trained professional in the room pause in disbelief. She had hair, thick, bright, almost glowing under the hospital lights. It wasn't the fine fuzz most babies have. This hair stood up in soft, unruly waves, silvery blonde and wild, as if it had a life of its own. One nurse gasped quietly. Another leaned closer, blinking as if her eyes were playing tricks on her. The doctor cleared his throat and smiled in surprise. "Well," he said gently, "this is something you don't see every day." Her mother, Margaret, was exhausted but alert. When they placed the baby in her arms, she laughed through tears, brushing her finger across the tiny head. "She looks like she's been struck by lightning," she whispered. Her husband, Daniel, smiled, but his expression lingered somewhere between wonder and worry. They named her Eliza. Within hours, whispers spread through the maternity ward. Nurses found reasons to check on the baby more often than necessary. Doctors stopped by just to take another look. Someone snapped a photo, then another. Eliza had become the quiet center of attention without making a sound. Behind the glass of the nursery, visitors gathered. Some smiled warmly, others stared in open curiosity. A few exchanged puzzled looks, unsure what they were seeing. Margaret noticed it all: the looks, the whispers, the sudden sense that her daughter was being studied, not simply welcomed into the world.
When Eliza was 3 days old, a local reporter called the hospital. Someone had mentioned the baby with the extraordinary hair. The reporter wanted a picture, maybe a short story. Margaret hesitated. She wanted to protect her daughter from the world, but she didn't yet understand how loud that world could be. The article appeared a week later. The headline was gentle but attention-grabbing. The photo showed Eliza asleep, her hair glowing like a halo. People clipped the newspaper and shared it. Calls came in from strangers asking questions no newborn should inspire. Was it a condition? Would it last? Did it mean something? Margaret stopped answering the phone. At home, life felt different. Neighbors dropped by unannounced. Family members brought friends just to see her. Some spoke kindly, others stared too long. Daniel tried to stay positive, telling himself it was harmless curiosity. But at night, Margaret sat beside the crib, watching her daughter sleep, wondering what kind of future awaited a child who couldn't blend in, even on her first day alive. Eliza's hair didn't change. Weeks passed, then months. It grew thicker, brighter, more impossible to ignore. Strangers smiled at her stroller. Others pointed. Some asked to touch her head. Margaret learned quickly that beauty and attention are not always gentle companions. She made a promise to herself then, a quiet one, spoken only in her heart. No matter how much the world stared, Eliza would always have a place where she was not a curiosity, where she was simply a child, loved, safe, enough. But the world was already watching, and Eliza's story had only just begun. If you want to hear how Eliza's life unfolded and how being different shaped her childhood, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and stay tuned for real challenges begin. Eliza learned she was different long before she understood what the word meant. By the time she could walk, people noticed her everywhere she went. At the grocery store, strangers slowed their carts. At the park, parents whispered while pretending not to stare. Some smiled warmly, Others tilted their heads with quiet curiosity. Eliza didn't know why eyes followed her, but she felt it. Her hair had only grown more striking with time. Soft, pale blonde, standing in unpredictable waves, refusing to be tamed. No brush could smooth it down. No ribbon could control it. It seemed to announce her presence before she ever spoke. At first, she thought this was normal. She assumed all children drew this kind of attention. That changed the day she started preschool. The classroom buzzed with energy and noise. Crayons scattered across tables. Tiny shoes lined up by the door. Eliza stepped inside holding her mother's hand, nervous but excited. It took less than a minute for the room to quiet. Children stared openly. One little boy pointed. A girl reached out without asking and tugged gently at Eliza's hair. "Is it real?" she asked. Eliza froze. She didn't know how to answer. The teacher stepped in quickly, reminding the class about kindness and personal space. But the moment lingered. For the first time, Eliza felt something unfamiliar: self-consciousness. That afternoon, she asked Margaret a question that would echo for years. "Why do they look at me like that?" Margaret knelt beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. "Because you look special," she said softly. "And sometimes people don't know how to act when they see something special."
Eliza nodded, but the explanation didn't fully land. As the years passed, the attention didn't fade, it sharpened. In elementary school, classmates whispered. Some were kind, defending her when others teased. Some were cruel in quiet ways, laughing when they thought teachers weren't listening. Eliza learned to keep her head down, to speak only when spoken to. Teachers remembered her instantly, even if they struggled with other names. She was always the girl with the hair. Birthday parties were complicated. Sleepovers felt uncomfortable. Eliza became careful, measuring her words, watching reactions, learning when to smile, even if she didn't feel like it. At home, she was different, quiet, thoughtful. She spent hours drawing, creating worlds where characters were unusual and powerful, where being different was never a weakness. Margaret noticed how her daughter disappeared into these drawings, as if they offered shelter from a noisy world. Daniel tried to encourage confidence. "People stare because they're curious," he told her, "not because something's wrong with you. But curiosity can still hurt." By middle school, Eliza understood something important. Attention is not the same as acceptance. Compliments didn't always feel kind. Questions didn't always feel harmless. Her hair became something she carried, like a spotlight she couldn't turn off. She tried hats, headbands, pulling it back as tightly as possible. Nothing worked. The mirror always reflected the same truth she could not hide. One afternoon, after a particularly hard day, Eliza stood in front of that mirror longer than usual. She touched her hair, gently this time. Instead of frustration, she felt something else, confusion mixed with a quiet sadness. Was this something she needed to fight forever? She didn't have an answer yet, but deep down something was forming, a realization she couldn't name, a strength she hadn't discovered. Eliza was growing, not just older, but more aware, and soon the world would test her in ways she never expected. If you want to see how Eliza's story changes as she enters her teenage years and how the pressure of being different intensifies, subscribe, like, and everything begins to shift. By the time Eliza reached her teenage years, she understood something clearly. Being different didn't pause as you grew older. If anything, it became louder. Middle school had been uncomfortable. High school was something else entirely. Teenagers noticed everything. Mirrors mattered. Opinions carried weight. And Eliza's hair, still pale, wild, and impossible to ignore, made her visible in every room before she ever spoke. Some classmates complimented her. Others mocked her. Most simply watched. Eliza learned quickly that attention came in many forms, and not all of them were kind. She stopped raising her hand in class. She avoided walking through crowded hallways. She learned which routes kept her from being noticed too much. Teachers praised her quiet nature, not realizing it was something she had taught herself out of necessity. At home, she found comfort in solitude. Drawing turned into painting. Painting turned into long nights filled with color and emotion. Her art became darker, more complex. Faces without eyes, figures standing alone under bright lights. Margaret worried but didn't interfere. She sensed her daughter was speaking in the only way she knew how. Daniel tried to keep things light. High school ends, he reminded her. Life gets bigger. Eliza wasn't sure she believed him. Then something unexpected happened. During her sophomore year, a new art teacher arrived. Unlike others, she didn't comment on Eliza's appearance. She commented on her work. One afternoon, she stopped beside Eliza's desk and studied a painting longer than usual. "You see the world differently," she said. "That's not something to hide." It was the first time an adult spoke to her like that. The teacher encouraged Eliza to submit a piece to a regional student art show. Eliza resisted. Exhibitions meant people. People meant attention. Attention meant questions she didn't want to answer. But something inside her shifted. She submitted the painting. Weeks later, her name was announced as one of the winners. Standing on a small stage under bright lights, Eliza felt the familiar panic rise. Eyes were on her again, but this time they weren't looking at her hair. They were listening. For the first time, the spotlight didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. That moment didn't fix everything, but it planted a seed. Eliza began to understand that being seen didn't always have to hurt. Sometimes it could heal. As graduation approached, fear returned in a different form. Leaving home meant starting over. New people, new stairs, new expectations. The thought terrified her, but staying scared her more. She applied to colleges far from home, cities big enough to swallow her difference, places where being unusual might not make her the only one. When her acceptance letter arrived, Eliza sat quietly for a long time. She thought of the little girl who once asked why people stared. She thought of the mirror she used to avoid. She packed her bags with shaky hands. College life was overwhelming. Crowded classrooms, constant movement, and yes, attention. Strangers commented openly. Some took photos without asking. Old fears resurfaced quickly. One night, scrolling through messages online after a candid photo of her went viral, Eliza broke down. The world felt too loud again, too invasive. She considered giving up, returning home, shrinking back into the safety she knew. Margaret's voice grounded her over the phone. "You don't owe anyone invisibility," she said softly, "and you don't have to disappear to survive." Eliza stayed. She focused on her work, on her growth, on choosing courage, even when it shook. The world was still watching, but for the first time, Eliza was learning how to stand without folding. And soon, she would make a choice that changed everything. If you want to see how Eliza begins to take control of her story and how she transforms attention into strength, subscribe, like this video, and don't miss where she starts redefining who she truly is.
College didn't change Eliza overnight, but it changed the way she listened to herself. The campus was loud, busy, and full of people who seemed comfortable being exactly who they were. Eliza watched them from a distance at first, unsure how she fit into a world that moved so confidently. Her hair still drew attention everywhere she went. Compliments followed her down sidewalks. Curious glances lingered longer than she liked. But something was different now. No one here knew her past. No one remembered the quiet girl who avoided hallways. No one knew the fear she carried from childhood. This time, Eliza wasn't reacting to expectations. She was choosing how to show up. She focused on her studies. Visual arts gave her language for emotions she never learned to say out loud. Her projects explored identity, exposure, and the cost of being seen. Professors noticed her work immediately. Class critiques became conversations instead of judgments. For the first time, Eliza felt respected for her mind before her appearance. Still, the world outside the classroom didn't soften. A stranger once stopped her in the street and asked to take a picture. Another time, someone filmed her without permission and laughed when she objected. Old anger rose up, sharp and familiar. One evening, she stood in her dorm bathroom staring at her reflection. The bright lights emphasized every strand of hair she used to fight against. For years, this mirror had felt like an enemy. That night, she made a quiet decision. She stopped trying to control what couldn't be controlled. Eliza walked out the next morning without pulling her hair back. No hat, no effort to hide. She felt exposed, but also strangely light. Each step felt like reclaiming something she had given away long ago. Not everyone reacted kindly, but Eliza noticed something important. Their reactions no longer decided how she felt about herself. Her confidence didn't come from ignoring fear. It came from standing beside it.
During her second year, she joined a student exhibition focused on identity. Her piece featured a figure standing under intense light, head held high, eyes open. When the show opened, people lingered at her work longer than she expected. A young woman approached her afterward, voice shaking. "I've spent my whole life hiding," she said. "Your work made me feel less alone." That moment stayed with Eliza. She realized then that her difference wasn't just something she survived, it was something that could help others breathe easier. Being seen had given her pain, yes, but it also gave her purpose. But the internet doesn't forget easily. An old photo resurfaced online, shared without context. Comments flooded in. Some praised her uniqueness, others reduced her to spectacle. For a brief moment, doubt crept back in. Was she strong enough to live openly in a world that could still be cruel? Eliza logged off. Instead of responding, she poured everything into her final project, a series of pieces exploring ownership of identity. The exhibition was her most successful yet. Critics praised its honesty. Viewers connected deeply. For the first time, Eliza told her story in her own words. She wasn't the girl people talked about anymore. She was the woman speaking. And as graduation approached, she understood something clearly. She didn't need to disappear to be safe. She needed to exist fully. Because the world was always going to look. The difference now was that Eliza no longer looked away. If you want to see what happens when Eliza returns to the world that first defined her and how she finally makes peace with her past, subscribe, like this video, and watch where everything comes full circle.
Eliza didn't plan to go back home. Life after graduation moved quickly. New projects, new clients, and a small apartment in a city that never felt the need to explain itself. For the first time, Eliza lived somewhere her presence didn't cause silence. People noticed her hair, but they also noticed her work, her voice, her confidence. Still, some nights, memories surfaced uninvited. The stares, the whispers, the mirrors she once avoided. When her mother called and mentioned a community art event in her hometown, Eliza hesitated. It had been years since she walked those familiar streets. She worried that stepping back would pull her into an older version of herself, the girl who learned to shrink. But something inside her had changed. She agreed to return. The town felt smaller than she remembered. Streets she once crossed with caution now seemed almost gentle. Familiar faces recognized her immediately. Some smiled with pride, others stared as they always had. Eliza noticed, but she didn't flinch. At the community center, her artwork hung on clean white walls. People gathered quietly, studying each piece. Eliza watched from a distance, heart steady. She wasn't nervous, just reflective. A former classmate approached her, eyes soft with recognition. "You were always brave," they said. Eliza smiled politely, knowing how untrue that once was. She visited her old school the next morning. Hallways echoed with younger voices now. A teacher recognized her and laughed. "We always wondered what you'd become," she said. Eliza thought of the girl who once avoided eye contact in those same halls. That afternoon, she stood outside her childhood home. Margaret opened the door and pulled her into a long embrace. Inside, everything felt frozen in time, the furniture, the light, the quiet safety. Margaret reached out and touched Eliza's hair the way she always had, gently, without curiosity. "You carried something heavy," she said, "and you carried it well."
For the first time, Eliza understood how much strength her parents had needed too, how fear didn't belong to her alone.
That evening, at the art event's closing, Eliza was asked to speak. She hadn't prepared anything. Standing in front of familiar faces, she felt the old tension rise, but it didn't take hold. "I grew up believing I needed to hide," she said honestly, "not because I was ashamed, but because I was afraid of being misunderstood." The room was silent. "But fear doesn't disappear when you avoid it," she continued. "It fades when you face it." People nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Eliza wasn't performing, she was sharing. When the event ended, a young girl approached her quietly. She had unruly hair of her own and nervous eyes. "They stare at me too," she whispered. Eliza knelt down. "I know," she said, "but it doesn't last forever." That moment mattered more than any exhibition. As Eliza left town the next day, she felt lighter, not because the past had changed, but because it no longer owned her. She didn't resent the girl she once was. She honored her, because without her, there would be no woman standing confidently in the present. If you want to see how Eliza's story concludes and what she believes truly defines a person, subscribe, like this video. Eliza is often asked a question she once feared. If you could change it, people say carefully, would you? They're not asking about her childhood, or the stares, or the loneliness that followed her for years. They're asking about her hair, the thing that announced her before she ever learned how to introduce herself. Eliza never answers immediately. She has learned that some questions deserve patience. Her life now is quieter, but fuller. She works on projects that challenge her creatively. She mentors young artists who struggle with feeling exposed in a world that expects perfection. Many of them arrive carrying invisible weights. Eliza recognizes that look instantly, the tension of someone waiting to be judged. She never begins with her story. She asks about theirs. When people finally learn who she is, some react with surprise, others with curiosity, a few with awe. But Eliza no longer measures herself through their reactions. That power has returned to her. There was a time when she believed her difference was something to overcome, something standing between her and peace. Now she understands it was never the obstacle, it was the path. Her hair still draws attention, strangers still stare, phones still rise in public places, but the world no longer feels entitled to her response. Eliza has learned that visibility doesn't mean availability. Some days she stands in front of the mirror and remembers the child who once asked why she didn't look normal. She wishes she could reach back through time and answer, "You are not broken, you are becoming." The experiences that once made her shrink now shape her work. Her art carries honesty that people feel before they understand. Exhibitions bring conversations, conversations bring connection, and connection brings healing, not just for her, but for those who see themselves reflected in her story. Eliza doesn't claim that being different is easy. It isn't. But she has learned that strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It shows up quietly, again and again, in the choice to stand without apology. Sometimes she speaks at events. She tells rooms full of strangers what it's like to grow up under constant observation. She talks about fear, not as something to eliminate, but as something to walk beside. Her words don't inspire because they are dramatic. They inspire because they are honest. At the end of one talk, a man asked her, "So what defines you now?" Eliza smiled. "Not what people see first, but what I choose to carry forward," she said. She still visits her parents often. Margaret still touches her hair the same way, without judgment, without curiosity, just love. It reminds Eliza how far she's come and how much she was held along the way. The world will always notice what stands out, but Eliza has learned something most people never do. Being seen is not the same as being known, and being different is not the same as being alone. Her story doesn't end with attention or acceptance.
It ends with ownership, with peace, with a woman who no longer wonders if she belongs because she knows she does, exactly as she is. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who feels different. Your support helps more stories like this be told.